Hey everybody, I'm Jack Reda with Future Pastimes. I'm one of the designers for the expansions to the 2019 edition of the classic Dune board game published by Gale Force 9. And in this video, I'm going to be talking about strategy tips for the Spacing Guild. The Spacing Guild, or the Guild, is one of the 6 base game factions. They are a pretty easy faction to understand in terms of its advantages. All the advantages fit on one side of the sheet, which is nice. So it's just a couple of base game advantages, one advanced game advantage. So it's pretty straightforward. But the real key is how can you leverage those advantages in order to win the game? The Guild is not typically considered a very strong faction, and partly that's because their leaders are fairly weak, and they don't have any combat advantage per se. So how do you take advantage of what they can do in order to win? Let's take a look, and we'll see what we can come up with. Let's start off by looking at those leaders. So you got your 5 leaders. You've got the Guild rep. He's not very impressive. He doesn't even have a name. It's just a 1 and pretty forgettable. Sususuk, only a 2, also not great. Master Butte is just a 3. And then you've got Esmar Tuik, also a 3. And then you've got Staben, who's a 5. And a fun fact that in the book, Staben is actually Esmar's son. So I don't know what's going on there. Some pretty hard living, I think, for Staben. I'm not sure what happened. But a 5 is their strongest leader, only one of them. Everybody else, 3, 2, 1. So yeah, their leaders are not particularly strong. The other thing that you want to take a look at in terms of their strength is that they only have a free revival of 1 force. So that can be problematic as well. You're only going to get 1 out for free in the revival phase. You have to pay to get 2 more out in a normal game that doesn't have the Tleilaxu in it. But let's take a look at what the advantages they do have and come up with some ways to leverage those in order to win. So starting at the top here, they're going to start with 5 forces and 2 each, and that's pretty good. It's good to start off on the board, and 5 forces and 2 is pretty good. 2 is the second hardest stronghold to get to from the surface of the planet. You can't get to it in 3 moves from any of the other strongholds, so that's pretty nice. It's a relatively safe location. And in the advanced game, it does have a 1 spice income for occupying 2 and 1 spice, not a lot, but every spice counts. So it's good to have something for having that. Moving on to their advantages, it's just a couple of advantages. That's why it's pretty straightforward. The big one here is that you're getting payment for shipping. So when other factions ship to the planet from off-planet, they're going to spend that spice and they're going to give it to you, the Guild. So you're going to have a fairly regular income throughout the game. But it's going to be fluctuating. So there are going to be some turns where a number of players are going to be able to ship a good number of forces down, and that's going to be a nice income. But there are going to be plenty of turns where either nobody's shipping, or there's only 1 faction shipping, or they're only sending 2 forces down. And so you can never really rely on necessarily on a lot. And it's also going to depend on the mix of the factions, because the Fremen don't ever pay to ship. They get to bring their forces onto the board for free. The Bene Gesserit are also going to try to avoid paying for shipping as much as possible, because they can bring forces down with the spiritual advisors onto the board for free, 1 at a time. With the expansion factions, most of them do have to pay to get down onto the planet. The Ixians start off on the planet, but they're going to want to keep bringing more forces on. The Tleilaxu don't start on the planet at all, and they can't really rely on their face dancers to get very many forces on there, so they'll pay for shipping. Chom will have to pay. Rich S, on the other hand, well, they've got the no-field tokens, so they only have to pay as if they're shipping 1 force whenever they use them, so that's only going to be 1 or 2 spice. So like I said, depending on the mix of the factions in the game, you will have a regular income, but how much is going to be hard to predict from turn to turn. On that first turn, you're only going to have 5 spice, so you should definitely go ahead and try to bid up to 5 every turn of the bidding phase to try to get at least 1 card. Because getting cards is going to be the key to winning as the Guild. You've got to get a hold of some weapons and defenses so that they can bolster your weak leaders in some ways. The one thing that you can do fairly effectively is to bring a large number of forces onto the planet into any given territory. And that's going to be the other key to how you win battles is what we like to call doom stacking. You're bringing such a large number of forces down that even if your leader is killed and you don't kill the other player's leader, you can dial high enough that you'll still win. And in the advanced game, you're probably going to have some spice so that you can spice dial to really maximize the number of forces that you can dial. So you've got that going for you, but it is costly, especially because, as you will remember, one free revival. So let's take a closer look at the advantages. We talked about the payment for the shipment. That's great too. The next thing is that the three types of shipment advantage that you've got. So there's three different ways that you can take advantage of shipping as the guild yourself. The first is that the cost for you to ship is half. So normally it's 1 spice per force to ship directly to a stronghold, 2 spice per force for a faction to ship outside of a stronghold, like to a spice blow or to the polar sink or to a rock territory. For the Spacing Guild, it's half of that. So you can basically, for 3 spice, you could bring 6 forces into a stronghold. Or if you're shipping 5 forces into a desert territory, it only costs 5 spice. It's rounded up. So if you're bringing just 3 forces into a stronghold, that's going to be 4 spice. So always try to take advantage of it. Don't overpay for your shipping. Get to maximum out of it whenever that you can. The second thing that they can do when they're shipping is they can cross-ship, and this is something that other factions can't do. And what that means is if you have a stack of forces on the board, instead of bringing more forces down from your reserves, you're actually just going to move those forces on the board to any territory. And the cost of that shipment is the destination. So if you're shipping them, cross-shipping them to a stronghold, it's basically 2 forces for 1 spice. And if you're cross-shipping to a desert territory, for instance, it would be 1 spice per force to do that. And a cross-shipment can be very handy. If you've brought down a big stack of forces somewhere, it might be better to cross-ship them than try to bring more forces down. And having a big stack of forces is pretty good for the guild because it will often act as a deterrent. If you've got 10 forces in a territory, most factions aren't anxious to get into a fight with you because they know that you can max dial and win that battle even if you're not going to have any forces left over. And remember, there are reasons to sacrifice all of your forces. That is, one, if you've got good treachery cards that you don't want to lose, if you win the battle, even if you've sacrificed all of your forces, you will get to keep your cards. And the other player will have to discard theirs. And the other is if leaders do get killed, you collect spice for the dead leaders, and that's the winner that gets that. So sometimes it's worth it to max dial, and the players will know that. So unless they're purposely just trying to force you to kill all of your forces, they usually will try to avoid it. And that's one of the few ways that you can try to leverage information from somebody. For instance, with the Atreides. If you want to play strictly by the designer recommendation, where there's no spice bribing in the basic game of Dune, it's hard to get information from the Atreides or from the Ixians if they're in the game because you can't bribe them. But sometimes if you can say, look, I promise not to doom stack you in a particular territory, if you'll give me some card information, sometimes the players will go for it. It's really hard to leverage that in basic. And so like a couple of the factions in Dune, they're not as strong in basic as they are in advanced. So let's look at the last thing that you can do with your shipping advantage, and that is to ship back to reserves. Also something that the other factions can't do. Once they get on the planet, they are there until they're dead. But with the guild, you have the ability to move your forces off of the planet and back to your reserves. Now, I don't see that happening very often. One of the only reasons you might do that is if players know that you don't have a weapon or defense and you're just basically an easy target. You might want to get off of the board so that somebody's not going to pick a fight with you just because they know that they can win it. But, of course, the polar sink is a safe territory to be in. and it's centrally located. So if you've got forces in the polar sink and you ship one force down into Arakeen, you can have those sink forces move into Arakeen as well. So that's why I don't really see people moving back to reserves very much. But you can do it, and sometimes maybe you just want to get them back on so that you've got more reserves. Who knows? It's an advantage that you have that no one else can do. It's just not often a very useful one. But the last advantage that you have in Basic is pretty useful, and that is your special victory condition. And that means that if by the end of turn 10, nobody has won the game by occupying the requisite number of strongholds, then the Spacing Guild wins. And if you're in an alliance, your ally would win with you. And what's interesting about this is that the Bene Gesserit cannot predict a turn 10 victory for the Spacing Guild because of their special victory condition. So what does that mean? That means that sometimes if you are not very well positioned to win the game through stronghold victory, the strategy for the guild is to just prevent other players from winning. And that's where the doom stacking can come in handy. Somebody's going for the win, and you bring in enough forces that you know you can max dial and prevent them from winning the game. The trouble is, if that happens early enough, you're going to have a lot of forces in the tank. So with only one free revival, you want to make sure that you hopefully have some spice so that you can pay to get some forces out on the next revival. Because it doesn't really help that if they've gone for it in turn 6 and you have sacrificed all of your forces to prevent it, but then you can't really do anything on turn 7, then who knows what's going to happen. But it is something you can do, and it's better to sacrifice them all to prevent the win than it is to lose. So obviously that's the case. So like I said, in the basic game, because you can't really bribe, you're going to have to try to take advantage of your income to be able to afford cards. If you can get a hold of a decent weapon and or a defense, because you can afford to outbid most of the other players, then that's going to help you to position yourself to be able to win some fights and potentially go for a win before turn 10. Your attractiveness as an ally is your income and your half-priced shipping, because your ally gets to take advantage of that as well. And so that means that you're probably not a very attractive ally to the Fremen, who don't need half-price shipment. But if they don't have many or any treachery cards, you can help pay for those. So that is another thing. Remember, any economic faction can help out somebody who can't afford to buy cards and has a lot of space in their hand to buy them. But for most of the other factions, that half-price shipment can be critical to helping you to win the game. Let's talk a little bit about your advanced game advantage and why it really elevates the guild into a much more competitive faction. And that is this advantage right here: ship and move when you wish. That means that when you get to the shipping and movement phase, you can choose to go first, you can choose to go last, and you can choose to go in between any two players that you want. And that can be very important because it can help you to prevent a win by stronghold blocking. And that is where you move into strongholds to prevent somebody else from going into that stronghold to go for the win. So let's say that you're afraid that the Harkonnen are going to go for the win. So you ship a force into Arakeen, where the Atreides are, and now the Harkonnen can't move into there. And maybe you cross-ship from Tuix over to Siege Tabor, so that the Harkonnen can't just move from Carthag to Tabor in order to attack the Fremen there, for instance. And in some cases, you're getting in there to stronghold block, not because you want to win that battle. You're just there to hog up the space. And you can sometimes throw those battles. And that is one of the ways that in Basic you can get information. So you say, hey, I'll block Arakeen. I'll come in and fight, and I'll throw that fight to you, Atreides, if you let me see a couple of cards in the next auction. So that can work in Basic and Advanced. In terms of other ways that this can be important is you going last, which is almost always useful information. You can see what the other players are going to do and then decide what you're going to do. And that's important to help prevent the win. It's important to know, oh, hey, look, there's a spice blow that nobody's going after, so I can ship directly to it. And by going last, I know that I'm not going to get attacked there. So going last, very important for being able to make a decision based on what the other players do. Going first lets you head people off and get into a location before they do, which can also be very important. Let's talk about the spice bribing, though. Because you've got the regular income, you're going to have spice, and you'll be in a better position to bribe. And there's a couple ways I like to bribe when I'm the guild. One is, again, for information, to say, look, I can bribe you, Atreides, because you don't have an income, and I do, in order to get card information about what's coming up in the next auction, so that when you are buying your cards, you're getting weapons and defenses and not worthless cards. The other is to try to get players to do your bidding. So why should you sacrifice your forces to stronghold block when you could bribe somebody else to do it? So somebody's like, well, I was going to bring some forces down, but I can't really afford it. You can say, look, you pay that and I will bribe you back some or all of your payment. And they won't collect that until the end of that turn, but they're basically getting that spice back. So that is a useful way. You're like, all right, I got 8 spice here from the Emperor's shipment, so I can afford to spend a little bit back to Atreides to get them to go fight the Emperor, and that way they'll have some incentive to do so. So I think bribing can be extremely useful, and if you're an economic faction, you're better positioned to do that. So look around and see what's going on. Try to encourage the factions to fight each other. Say, oh, look, they're going after that spice blow. We don't want them to get all that spice. You should go fight them, and I'll bribe you to do it, and give you back some of your payment for that shipment. That is by and large what it is to be the guild. You're going to try to take advantage of your income as much as you can. Hopefully get some cards that can make you more competitive, depending, no matter who you're up against, and taking advantage of your shipping abilities. That discount can be great. You're going to get the income, which is nice, from most of the factions, but the fact that you're paying half as much to ship can be very useful. And I like to put a large stack of forces down on the board somewhere, just so that I know that I can use that deterrent. I can also cross-ship some or all of those forces somewhere else later on to get away from the storm, or to move right to another spice blow, or to stronghold block, or to go for the win. But the big thing is that special victory condition. So a lot of times the strategy for guild is just to be a spoiler, to go and make sure that nobody can win the game until you get to that last turn. And that's what's interesting about the Spacing Guild, is that they're universally considered a weak faction. Nevertheless, they tend to have the most wins, and that is because of the stall-out victory condition. So if you're playing Dune for the first time, the guild is one of a good faction to play for a new player, because it is pretty straightforward, and know that you can bring a lot of forces into a territory at a time. Just always be mindful of the fact that you only have one free revival. So make sure that you've got some spice tucked away for a rainy day. And use those leaders smartly. Your weak leaders are easy to sacrifice, because if they die, you're not giving very much spice to the other player if they win that battle. But you've got to make sure that you have leaders, because if you don't have any leaders left, you can't play any treachery cards. So that's basically it. There's not a lot more to be said about the Spacing Guild. If you've got other insights, though, about how you have managed to win with the Spacing Guild, please share that information. Any other useful tips that you have about the guild and Dune in general. I look forward to hearing from you about that. And thanks for watching.